In this session, we will see how to configure call graphs. Let's talk about transaction snapshots and call graphs. If AppDynamics identifies a performance problem in your application stack, it will take a snapshot of transactions. Otherwise, it will not take a snapshot. If everything is good in your application, it will never take a snapshot. For example, if within last 5 minutes it didn't take a snapshot because everything was running fine. So if you open a snapshot, you can see the call graph within each tier. So I can drill down into gateway and see what is happening in code level. So you can see you can drill down into either request path or the response path. How do I know it's the request path? It says one exit call is made. So I made one web service exit call to ESP. So that is for request and that is for response. So if I drill down into request, I can see what is executed within gateway. So the request is landed in this POJO entry point dot receive method, but there is no call graph after this. But we can see an exit call is made to ESP. So if you click on that web service, you can drill down into the exit call to ESP. And now that will open up the relevant call graph within ESP. And within ESP also, we don't see the call graph after that. Similarly, we can click on this web service exit call. It will go to uh, it will open up the relevant call graph of DSS, right? So why we are not able to see these call graphs? That is because AppDynamics by default excluded some package from Apache libraries. So you can see the Synapse library and access to libraries are excluded from this result. So we can click on this and go and configure the call graph. So we can also go to uh, configuration, instrumentation, call graph settings. These packages are ignored from the call graphs. Uh, you can see org dot everything is excluded. So our Apache Synapse, Apache Assist2, org doubles to carbon, everything is goes under here. So everything is ignored from the call graphs. So we can add. You cannot edit that. That is by default. You cannot do anything, but you can go ahead and add some exceptions, right, to be included in your call graph. So let's do that. All the carbon, all the WSO2 classes. Snap classes. All the assist2 classes. And I also want to capture the row. It's SQL executed from WSO2. I'm going to save the call graph settings, and that's it you need to do. Now, if a transaction snapshot is taken, we can see the call graphs. By default, as I mentioned earlier, the transaction snapshot will not be taken. If there is a performance issue, it will be taken. But you can trigger a diagnostic session manually so that you can capture transaction snapshot on demand, right? So you can start a session and you can tell which uh, transaction to be captured. So that will be WSOT employee only. So start the transaction snapshot, the diagnostic session, and after some time you will be able to see the snapshot here. Now let's have a look at transaction snapshots. So there are multiple ways to get into a snapshot screen. The first one is from the application dashboard. You can click on transaction snapshots. It will display the snapshot of all the transaction. If you want individual transaction snapshot, you can go to business transactions and double click on this. It will open up the transaction dashboard, and from there you can click on the transaction snapshot, right? Now, AppDynamics will not take snapshot if there is no performance problems in my application stack. Uh, so if there are problems, then it will take a snapshot so that you can analyze what is causing the problems in code level. So for that, this transaction snapshot will contain informations like call graphs and much more. So double click on that transaction snapshot, you will see the flow map, and from this flow map you can drill down into the request path or the response path. Let me drill down into the request path. Now I'm able to see the call graphs. Landing on receive method, I'm making an exit web service call, so that is to get all the URL templates from key manager, and then uh, get API key data from key manager, right? And then the last one is the web service call that is going to VSB. If you click on this one and drill down into downstream call, it will open up the relevant call graph in WSO/DSP. And yes, I can see that there's a script mediator consuming 2 seconds in the response path, in the request path, and it is calling the DSS. Let's go into DSS call graph, and we cannot see the call graph. The reason is the method should execute more than 10 milliseconds. Then only AppDynamics will display the call graph. Otherwise, it won't display because there is no performance related problem if a method is executed within 10 milliseconds, right? So let's go to this uh, drill down again and drill down into response path. The response path within gateway, there's a sequence mediator taking around 500 milliseconds. So let's see what is that. That is again a script mediator. So I have a script mediator in the response path within gateway and also in the request path within ESP, right? So you can see now you can track a transaction from end to end, from ESP, from gateway to ESP to DSS, right? So that is about call graphs. As I mentioned earlier, the AppDynamics will not take transaction snapshot if there is no performance problem in the application stack. But if you want to take the snapshot on demand, there is a way to do that. You can trigger a diagnostic session manually. Then AppDynamics will start to capture transaction snapshots. You can start a session, you can tell which transaction you want to take snapshot from, right? So I'm interested in employee API. Let me start a transaction snapshot. Now if you click on this snapshot, after some time you'll be able to see series of transaction snapshots. Now you can see there are multiple transaction snapshots. Right? So these are captured from the manual diagnostic session that I have triggered. Right? So you can click on here and then you can go inside and analyze it. Let's open this snapshot and understand what is displayed in a snapshot flow map. So the 314 millisecond displayed right here is the time a transaction lives within request path of gateway. Right? Then 503 millisecond is an asynchronous response path. Similarly, the 2 second in ESB is for request path latency. 752 millisecond is response path latency. Here 6 millisecond latency is for processing the request. Right? If you go back to this snapshot window, you will see the total execution time of a transaction is 371. This is clearly wrong. The reason is in ESB alone, we are spending 2 seconds, almost 3 seconds, and then here again 1 second, right? So it should be around 4 seconds. But this is displaying 371. So the execution time that is displayed here is for the execution time within the request path of gateway alone. Right? So if you drill down here, what is the request path execution time? That is 371. So that is the one displayed over there. Right? So this includes the communication with key manager and then process the request and sending it to ESP. That's it. But we are not interested in the request path latency of gateway alone, right? We are interested in the end-to-end latency from gateway to ESP to DSS to database, right? So we had to configure asynchronous transaction in AppDynamics. The reason is the call from gateway to ESP is a non-blocking HTTP call. Right? Once a gateway sends a request to ESP, it doesn't wait for the response. It registers a callback and the thread returns immediately. Right? And that is the reason AppDynamics is not able to track the end-to-end latency by default. So we had to do some configuration for that. We will see how to do that configuration in the next session.